She had no home, but carried a strength no one could steal. The millionaire threw money at her feet and laughed like someone who had never suffered. When he found out she was a virgin, something inside him broke and burned. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. We continue. The silence of New York nights carried a different weight in the downtown area. Among the skyscrapers that stood like monuments to savage capitalism, the streets transformed into a stage of brutal contrasts. It was there, in the shadows of Fifth Avenue, that Dawn Mitchell walked invisible to the eyes of those who mattered. At 23, she had learned the art of disappearing in broad daylight. Her dark eyes carried a serenity that contrasted with the harsh reality around her. The threadbare blanket that protected her from the cold couldn't hide something that not even poverty had managed to destroy, a silent dignity that emanated from every gesture, every look. Dawn wasn't like other homeless people. She didn't extend her hand, didn't beg for coins. She worked sporadically as a waitress at events, did odd jobs in restaurants in the historic downtown area, and disappeared among the alleys like a secret. That refuses to die. What nobody knew was that she had chosen this life, fleeing from a past that breathed under her skin like a wound that never completely healed. In her hands, she always carried a worn, red-covered diary, filled with notes that seemed written in code, crossed-out names, strange symbols, phrases that only made sense to a soul that had learned to hide its deepest pains. Every night, even when the floor was cold concrete and the ceiling was the cloudy New York sky, she wrote. Between those pages, yellowed by time, she kept the only part of the world where she could still be whole. Leo Warren was the absolute opposite of everything Dawn represented. At 34, he was the CEO of Warren Holdings, one of the country's largest investment companies. Son of one of New York's most traditional families, he had been molded since childhood to be a money-making machine. He had grown up between Swiss boarding schools, business meetings, and the calculated coldness of a father who loved only results. Every display of fragility was punished with glacial silence. Every mistake cost weeks of absolute indifference. The result was a man made of stone and gold. Impeccably dressed, with a charm that opened doors and closed hearts, Leo didn't allow himself vulnerabilities. Women desired him for the power he emanated. Businessmen feared him for his relentless intelligence, but nobody really knew him. His pleasure came from absolute control, from the emotional predictability that his fortune provided. Relationships were transactions, feelings were investments that rarely worth the risk. In his penthouse in the Upper East Side, Leo observed the city through the bulletproof windows of his private office. New York stretched before him like a board where every move was calculated, every piece had its value. He controlled investment funds that moved billions, decided the fate of companies with a phone call, shaped markets with a simple press release. But on that rainy June night, when leaving a meeting with Japanese executives at the Plaza Hotel, his perfectly ordered world was about to crumble. The rain fell heavily on the downtown streets, turning sidewalks into improvised rivers. Leo was adjusting his Italian suit while his driver was retrieving the car when he saw her. A figure huddled under the marquee of a commercial building, shivering from cold, wet hair stuck to her face. She was just another homeless person, one of hundreds he passed daily without noticing. But something in that look made him stop. Dawn stared at him without asking for anything. She didn't extend her hand, didn't put on a pitiful face, didn't rehearse any speech about her situation. She just observed him with those dark eyes that seemed to see through the layers of power and money that protected him from the real world. And that deeply irritated him. With a cruel smile that he had perfected in the most merciless boardrooms in the country, Leo approached her. He took out a $50 bill from his pocket and threw it at her feet like someone feeding an abandoned animal. "Buy something warm," he said with studied indifference, "and look for a job. The world doesn't owe anyone anything." She didn't move. She didn't thank him, didn't pick up the money, didn't react to the humiliation. She just kept looking at him, with that disturbing serenity. It was at that moment that Leo felt something he hadn't experienced in years: discomfort, a small tremor in the ice structure he had built around his heart. 3 weeks after that encounter in the rain, Leo still found himself thinking about those eyes that asked for nothing. It was ridiculous, he knew that. A man of his position wasting mental time on some random homeless woman from the streets of New York. But there was something in that look that disturbed him in a way he couldn't explain or control. The opportunity to meet her again came unexpectedly during the launch of the Social Invisibility exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. The Warren Foundation had sponsored the event, one of those social responsibility initiatives that improved the company's image to European investors. Leo circulated among the guests with his usual calculated charm, greeting politicians, artists, and businessmen who pretended to care about the social issues portrayed in the works. That's when he saw her serving champagne among the guests. Dawn wore the standard uniform of the waitresses hired for the event. White blouse, black skirt, hair tied in an impeccable bun. But her eyes were unmistakable, that disturbing serenity that had been engraved in his memory like a brand. For a moment, Leo was paralyzed. The transformation was impressive. Clean, neat, with proper clothes, Dawn seemed to belong in that sophisticated environment. She moved among the guests with a natural elegance that contrasted with her situation on the streets. She wasn't submissive like the other employees, didn't smile forcibly, didn't bow to the powerful. She maintained the same silent dignity that had disturbed him that rainy night. He observed her throughout the night, the way she served drinks without lowering her eyes, how she answered guests' questions with politeness but without civility, how she seemed completely at ease in this world that wasn't hers. There was a quiet strength in her that defied all the social rules Leo knew. When the event was coming to an end, he approached her. Dawn was collecting empty glasses from a side table when she felt his presence behind her. She turned slowly, unhurriedly, as if she already knew this moment would come. "I didn't expect to find you here," Leo said, in a tone that tried to sound casual but carried a voracious curiosity. "The world is smaller than we imagine, isn't it?" Dawn replied, continuing her work without showing any surprise or nervousness. Her voice was different than he had imagined. It wasn't the broken voice of someone living on the streets, but something melodious, educated, with a soft New York accent that indicated middle-class origins. This intrigued him even more. "How did you get this job?" The question came out more direct than he intended. Dawn stopped collecting the glasses and looked at him for the second time. Again, that look that seemed to see through his soul. "I have my connections," she answered simply. Leo laughed, a humorless sound. Connections. Interesting word for someone who lives under marquees. And what would be the appropriate word, in your opinion? Dawn showed no irritation, just genuine curiosity that disconcerted him. He expected anger, defensiveness, perhaps even gratitude for him talking to her. But that unshakable calm left him groundless. It was like trying to provoke a mountain. "Don't know," he admitted, and for the first time in years felt vulnerable in a conversation. "I just know you're not like the others." "The others? What?" Dawn finished collecting the glasses and stood facing him, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. "The other poor people. The other homeless. The others who live on the streets." Leo realized how cruel his words sounded, even before finishing them. Dawn smiled for the first time, a small but genuine smile that completely transformed her face. "And how should the poor be in your opinion? Should we be grateful, submissive, desperate for your approval?" The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. Leo had grown up believing exactly that his wealth automatically put him in a superior position, that the less fortunate should be grateful for any crumb of attention they received from the powerful. He began, but couldn't finish the sentence. Dawn took a step closer, and Leo could smell the light perfume she wore, something floral that contrasted with the image he had of her. "You know what I learned living on the streets, Leo Warren?" She knew his name. "How?" "I learned that dignity has no price, that it can't be bought or sold, that it simply exists or doesn't exist." The sound of his name on her lips made him shiver. There was an intimacy in that pronunciation that left him completely disarmed. "And your dignity? Where was it when you were wet and shivering from cold?" The question came out crueler than he intended, a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "It was exactly where it is now," Dawn answered without hesitation. "In here." She lightly touched her chest, over her heart. "Circumstances change, Leo. Dignity remains." At that moment, Leo Warren, the man who controlled billions and decided the fate of thousands of people, felt smaller than ever, and at the same time inexplicably attracted to this woman who challenged him without needing to raise her voice. The obsession began subtly, like all dangerous obsessions. Leo found himself changing his route to the office to pass by places where he had seen Dawn. He discreetly instructed his driver to drive through certain downtown streets, always with a plausible excuse about non-existent meetings or appointments. It was pathetic, he knew that, but he couldn't stop. For 2 weeks he didn't find her. He began to question if she really existed or if she had just been a projection of his tired mind. But then, on a Thursday night, he saw her, leaving a bakery on Broadway, carrying a small bag of bread. She wore the same simple clothes as always, but there was something different about her walk, a determination that made him stop the car and get out, ignoring his driver's protests. About safety with Dawn. The name left his lips before he could think. How did he know that was her name? When had he discovered it? She turned without surprise, as if she had been waiting for him. Leo. The way she said his name continued to cause that strange shiver down his spine. "I need to talk to you." He approached, noticing how other people on the street observed them curiously. A man in a $3,000 suit talking to a homeless woman drew unwanted attention. "You're talking now." Dawn didn't move, but she also didn't show any hurry to leave. Leo looked around, aware of the indiscreet glances. "Not here. Let me take you somewhere where we can talk properly." "Properly." Dawn repeated the word as if she were tasting a bitter flavor. "And where would be appropriate for a conversation between us, in your opinion?" The question caught him off guard. In his penthouse, impossible. In a restaurant. She didn't have appropriate clothes. In his office, unthinkable. For the first time in his adult life, Leo found himself without a ready answer. He hesitated, feeling the heat rise up his neck. "We can go to my car." Dawn laughed, a low musical sound that made him feel even more ridiculous. "Your driver must be wondering if you've gone completely mad." Leo looked back. Robert, his driver for 10 years, really did look concerned, speaking quietly on his cell phone, probably with the company's security. The whole situation was absurd. "Why don't you accept me?" The question escaped before he could censor it. "Why did you refuse the money I offered? Why don't you show gratitude when I'm willing to talk to you?" Dawn was silent for a long moment, studying his face as if she were reading a particularly interesting book. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes. Because I don't need your acceptance to exist." She said this with devastating simplicity. "Because gratitude presupposes a debt, and I don't owe you anything. And because your money can't buy what you really want from me." "And what do I want from you?" Leo asked, though he feared the answer. Dawn took a step forward, coming so close that he could see the small, almost imperceptible scars on her hands, signs of a hard life that she carried with elegance. "You want me to validate your superiority by being inferior. You want me to be grateful so you can feel generous. You want me to be small so you can feel big." Each word was like a well-aimed stab. Leo felt anger rise, mixed with an excitement. He couldn't explain. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way. Nobody had had the courage or the audacity to strip him down like this in the middle of the street without raising their voice. "You don't know me," he said through clenched teeth. "I know men like you." Dawn took a step back, but not out of fear. It was more like a predator retreating to better observe its prey. "I grew up seeing men like you, men who believe their money makes them different, special, superior, who think they can buy people like they buy cars or houses. That's not true." "Isn't it?" Dawn tilted her head, and there was something almost maternal in her gesture, as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "Then why are you here, Leo? Why do you look for me? What exactly do you want from me?" The question hung in the air like a sharp blade. Leo opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't find words that didn't sound pathetic or arrogant. The truth was that he didn't know what he wanted. He just knew he needed to be near her, that this woman had become an obsession that consumed his thoughts. "I want to understand you," he finally admitted. "Why?" "Because you're different." Different from what? Leo felt cornered by the simple questions that demanded complex answers he wasn't prepared to give. Different from all the women I've known. Dawn smiled again, but this time there was an almost imperceptible sadness in her eyes. "Leo, you've never known a real woman. You've known women who wanted something from you, women who behaved as you expected them to behave, women who pretended to be what you wanted them to be. And you? What do you want from me?" The question came out desperate, almost pleading. Dawn observed him for a long moment, and for the first time Leo saw something that could be compassion in her eyes. "I don't want anything from you, Leo, and maybe that's exactly why you can't forget me." She turned to leave, but he held her by the arm. The physical contact was like an electric shock for both of them. Dawn looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face, and Leo saw something change in her expression. "Let me go," she said softly, but there was no anger in her voice. Leo released her immediately, but continued standing there, still feeling the warmth of her skin on his palm. "Dawn, You what?" She didn't move away, though she could have. "I don't know what's happening to me." The admission came out as a desperate whisper. Dawn studied him with those dark eyes that seemed to see his soul. "I know," she finally said. "You're discovering that your whole life has been a lie built with money and power, and that scares you more than any stock market crash." Before he could respond, she walked away, disappearing into the Broadway crowd like a ghost that only exists when directly observed. The discovery happened by chance, as the most devastating revelations often do. Leo had hired a private investigator, initially to ensure his personal safety. After all, his obsession with Dawn was taking him to dangerous parts of the city. But when he received the report on her 3 days later, he felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Dawn Mitchell, 23 years old, born in New York, daughter of Mary Mitchell, who had worked as an administrative assistant at the Warren Foundation between 2010 and 2015. Mary had died in a car accident under suspicious circumstances, just 2 weeks after being fired for behavioral incompatibility, a corporate euphemism that Leo knew all too well. His hands trembled when he read the details. Mary Mitchell had discovered irregularities in the foundation's accounting, misappropriation of funds intended for social projects that were redirected to personal accounts. When she tried to report it, she was efficiently silenced. Her car accident had been quickly filed away without in-depth investigation. Leo's father, Alan Warren, was still alive at the time and personally controlled all aspects of the company. Dawn had been orphaned at 14 and had been placed in the care of an aunt who saw her only as a burden. She ran away from home at 16, living on the streets since then. But what disturbed Leo the most was the last page of the report, a photo of Dawn at 15, still clean, still with hope in her eyes, holding a sign during a protest in front of the Warren Holdings building. The sign said, "Justice for Mary Mitchell." She had known who he was from the first moment. Each encounter, each word, each look had been calculated. Dawn wasn't a random victim of circumstances. She was someone who had lost everything because of his family and who now was, in some incomprehensible way, in his life. Leo spent 3 days locked in his penthouse, drinking Scotch whiskey and rereading the report. At first he felt betrayed, manipulated. Then came the guilt, heavy as lead in his chest. Finally he came to a disturbing understanding. Dawn had every reason in the world to hate him, to want to destroy him. But she showed neither hatred nor thirst for revenge. There was something in her that transcended the logic of retribution. On to the 4th night, he couldn't stay away any longer. He drove himself downtown, walking the streets until he found her sleeping under the awning of a fabric store on Canal Street. She was wrapped in her threadbare blanket, the red diary pressed against her chest like a shield. Leo stood there for more than an hour, just watching her sleep. Even in sleep, there was something powerful about her, a serenity that contrasted with the obvious vulnerability of her situation. When she finally opened her eyes and saw him, she showed no surprise at all. "You found out," she said simply, sitting up unhurriedly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Leo's voice came out hoarse, laden with emotions he couldn't name. Dawn hugged her, knees studying his face in the dimly lit street. "And what would you have done if you knew, given me money out of guilt, offered me a job out of pity, bought me a house to ease your conscience?" "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty of the answer seemed to surprise them both. "At least you're honest." Dawn stood up, shaking the dust off her clothes. "Most powerful men I've known would have lied to themselves, invented a heroic narrative where they would be my savior." Leo took a step forward. "Dawn, I didn't know. When my father did that, I was studying in Europe. I wasn't involved in any of it." "I know." The answer came too quickly, as if she had thought a lot about this. "You were 19 in your last year of business administration in London. You only returned to New York after his funeral." The fact that she knew so many details about his life left him even more disconcerted. "How long have you known me?" Dawn hesitated for the first time since they had met. "Forever," she finally said. "You were the son of the man who destroyed my family. For years, you were just a name I hated without knowing the face. And now?" She was silent for a long moment, looking at some point beyond him, as if she were seeing ghosts in the empty street. "Now it's more complicated." Leo felt something move in his chest, a dangerous hope. "Complicated how?" Dawn looked at him directly, and for the first time he saw real vulnerability in her eyes. "Because you're not the monster I imagined, because you're just a lost man who grew up in a golden cage, and because—" She stopped, as if the next words were physically painful to pronounce. "Because what?" "Because I should hate you, but I can't." The confession came out as a desperate whisper. "I should want to see you destroyed, ruined, suffering as my mother suffered. But when I look at you, I just see someone who was also a victim of the system that separated us." Leo felt tears burn his eyes, tears he hadn't shed since childhood. "Dawn, no." She raised her hand, preventing him from coming closer. "Don't say anything, don't promise anything, don't try to save me or fix me. I'm not a charity project or a means for you to redeem yourself for your father's sins. Then what are you?" Dawn smiled, but it was a smile full of sadness. "I am someone who learned that life isn't fair, that good people die and bad people prosper, that love and hate can coexist in the same heart without cancelling each other out." She picked up her worn backpack and began to walk away. Leo felt panic. "Where are you going?" "Away from you," she answered without turning, "because being near you makes me want things I can't have, makes me dream of a world where our story could be different." "And if it could be different?" The question came out desperate, almost shouted in the empty street. Dawn stopped but didn't turn. "It can't be, Leo. You're the heir to an empire built on the pain of people like me. I'm the daughter of a woman who died because she refused to stay quiet about your injustices. There's no happy ending for our story." She disappeared into the darkness of the New York dawn, leaving Leo alone with the weight of a truth he didn't know how to carry. For 2 weeks, Leo couldn't concentrate on anything. Meetings passed like an incomprehensible blur. Financial reports seemed written in a foreign language, and he found himself looking out the window of his office, as if dawn could materialize on Fifth Avenue through the force of his will. His employees whispered in the corridors, concerned about the erratic behavior of the CEO, who had always been a model of control and predictability. It was his personal assistant, Carlos, who finally had the courage to confront him. "Mr. Warren, I need to talk to you about the situation of the Foundation's projects. The Japanese investors are questioning the delays in approvals." Leo raised his eyes from the papers he wasn't really reading. "What projects?" Carlos hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "The new shelters for the homeless population. You approved the budget 3 months ago, but since then there has been no concrete progress." Something lit up in Leo's mind. Where will these shelters be built? Downtown area near Washington Square, and Carlos consulted his papers. Canal Street, locations with a high concentration of people in vulnerable situations. Leo stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket. Cancel my afternoon appointments. I'm going to visit the locations personally. Sir, that's not necessary. We have specialized teams to... Carlos. Leo's voice had that tone that didn't admit discussion. Cancel everything. An hour later, he was walking the streets of downtown New York with a completely different perspective. He was no longer in the back of his bulletproof Mercedes, protected from the real world by dark windows and air conditioning. He was there in the middle of the crowd, feeling the smells, hearing the sounds, seeing up close the reality he had always ignored. He found Dawn in the late afternoon, helping an elderly woman organize cardboard boxes to sleep under a bridge. She showed no surprise at seeing him, as if she had already expected his appearance. She wore a faded blue t-shirt and jeans torn at the knee, but there was something different about her face. A deeper serenity, as if she had come to some kind of acceptance. You came looking for me again, she said, without stopping helping the lady. I need to talk to you. Leo looked around, aware that he was being observed with curiosity by the other homeless people. In private, Dawn finished arranging the cardboard boxes and said goodbye to the elderly woman with genuine affection that made something tighten in Leo's chest. There is no private place for people like me, Leo. This is my home. These are my people. If you want to talk to me, it will be in front of them. The answer caught him off guard, but there was a relentless logic to it. Leo looked around, seeing faces marked by hard life, eyes that had seen too much, but also a kind of community he had never imagined existed. All right. Dawn finally turned to face him completely. What do you want, Leo? I want to make peace with the past. The answer came out more formal than he intended. I want to compensate for what my father did to your family. How? There was genuine curiosity in her voice, without sarcasm or contempt. Leo took a deep breath. I'm building shelters for the homeless population. I'm going to name the project Dawn Mary, in honor of you and your mother. I want to create a permanent fund for social assistance, education, reintegration. Stop. Dawn raised her hand, and there was something dangerous in her eyes. Do you really think you can buy your forgiveness by building some buildings and putting our names on them? It's not about buying forgiveness, it's about doing what's right. Right for whom? Dawn took a step forward, and Leo could see that she was genuinely irritated for the first time. For your conscience? For your public image? For the investors? Who likes socially responsible CEOs? For you. The answer came out louder than he intended, echoing under the bridge. It's for you, Dawn. Because I can't stop thinking about what happened to your mother. Because I can't sleep knowing you're here in this cold, when I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Dawn was silent for a long moment, studying his face as if she were reading a complex map. And you think I'm going to be grateful and throw myself into your arms because you built some shelters? I don't know what I expect, Leo admitted, and the brutal honesty of his answer seemed to disarm some of her anger. I just know I need to do something. I need you to know that I'm not my father. I already know that. The answer came soft, almost a whisper. If you were like him, you wouldn't be here now, getting dirty under a bridge to talk to me. Leo felt a dangerous hope light up in his chest. So there's a chance, a possibility of starting over. Dawn laughed, but it wasn't a cruel sound. It was melancholic, full of wisdom that seemed too old for her 23 years. Leo, you don't understand. It's not about forgiveness or second chances. It's about worlds that will never meet. Why not? Because you'll go back to your penthouse tonight. You'll take a hot shower, you'll eat dinner on porcelain plates, and you'll sleep in silk sheets. And I'll stay here cold, sharing a sandwich with Mrs. Rose and using newspaper as a blanket. Leo came closer, lowering his voice. But what if you didn't have to stay here? What if I could offer... No. Dawn shook her head firmly. You can't save me, Leo. Nobody can save anyone. People only save themselves when they decide to save themselves. Then save yourself. The plea came out desperate. Accept my help and save yourself. Dawn smiled with a deep sadness. You still don't understand, do you? I don't need to be saved. I need to be accepted as I am, where I am with the life I've chosen. And you can't do that because deep down, you still see me as a charity project. Before Leo could respond, Dawn walked away, joining a group of people who were talking around an improvised fire. He stood there alone in the middle of the street, realizing for the first time that perhaps the problem wasn't the difference between their worlds, but his inability to understand that her world had its own value, independent of what he could offer to change it. Leo's transformation didn't happen overnight, but through small cracks in his armor of privilege. He began to visit the places where Dawn spent time, not to look for her, but to try to understand the world she had chosen. He sat in downtown squares, ate in cheap diners, walked the streets without the protection of bulletproof cars or security guards. It was during one of these walks, on a rainy Friday in August, that he finally understood something fundamental. He was passing by a homeless occupation when he heard a familiar voice. Dawn was reading aloud to a group of children sitting on the concrete floor of an abandoned building. Her voice echoed through the peeling walls, giving life to stories that made the little ones forget, for a few minutes, the harshness of their realities. Leo hid behind a column, observing. It wasn't the vulnerable Dawn of the streets, nor the defensive Dawn of their encounters. It was a third version of her, radiant with purpose, completely at ease in her element. The children looked at her with adoration, hanging on every word, and she reciprocated with a genuine attention that Leo had rarely seen in his life of calculated relationships. When the story ended and the children dispersed, Dawn remained seated, writing in her red diary. It was then that Leo came out of his hiding place, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "You're good with them," he said, sitting on the floor beside her without asking permission. Dawn raised her eyes from the diary but didn't seem surprised. "They remind me of myself a few years ago, lost but still with hope." "And you? Do you still have hope?" She closed the diary, hugging it against her chest. "Some days. Others, not so much." Leo looked around the improvised space. Old sheets served as dividers between the rooms of families. Children played with toys made from scraps. Adults talked in small groups. There was an organization, a community he had never imagined existed. "Why did you choose this?" he asked, gesturing to the environment around them. "Choose?" Dawn laughed softly. "You think someone chooses to live like this? But you could leave. You have education, you're intelligent, you could get a job, an apartment." Dawn studied him with those dark eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Leo, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Have you ever experienced real hunger? Not diet hunger, or hunger from being too busy to have lunch. Real hunger, of not knowing where the next meal will come from." Leo hesitated, already knowing where she was going. "No." "Have you ever slept in the cold, afraid of being attacked during the night? Have you ever been invisible to the point where people pass by you as if you were part of the urban landscape?" "No." "Have you ever had to choose between buying medicine for an infection or eating for 2 days?" "Dawn." "Then how can you talk about choices as if I had the same options you've always had?" There was no anger in her voice, just a tired patience. "I didn't choose this life. I was pushed into it. The difference is that I learned to find dignity here, to create family where there was no blood, to make home where there was no roof." Leo felt something break inside him. "Teach me." "What?" "Teach me to see what you see. Teach me to understand this world." The plea came out genuine, without arrogance or condescension. Dawn was silent for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I want to know you for real. Not the version of you that fits into my world, but you as you really are, where you really live." For the first time since they met, Dawn seemed genuinely surprised. "Do you know what you're asking?" "No," Leo admitted. "But I want to learn." Dawn stood up, extending her hand to him. "Come then, but there are rules." Leo took her hand, feeling a familiar shiver at the touch. "What rules?" "First rule, you leave your wallet, your cell phone, your watch, everything that identifies you as rich stored away. Second rule, you don't talk about money, business, your previous life. Third rule, you don't try to help anyone with your fortune. And fourth rule, she stopped, looking directly into his eyes. You don't try to save me, not once. For how long? 2 days, 48 hours of my life, my way. Leo hesitated for only a second. 2 days away from his company, from his commitments, from his controlled world. It was unthinkable, it was irresponsible, it was dangerous. I accept. Dawn smiled for the first time in a completely genuine way, and the smile transformed her entire face. Then take off your clothes. What? That suit costs more than most. People here make in a year. Wear this. She took an old backpack and removed simple clothes, a faded t-shirt, worn jeans, a jacket with some tears. And your shoes. Use these sneakers. Leo looked at the worn sneakers, then at his genuine Italian leather shoes. It was more than changing clothes. It was temporarily abandoning his identity, his social armor. Here? He asked, looking around. The occupation. There. Dawn pointed to a corner isolated by sheets. And Leo. Yes? Welcome to my world. When Leo emerged 10 minutes later, wearing the simple clothes, Dawn observed him critically. Better, but there's still something about you that screams money. It's your posture. The way you keep your shoulders straight. How you look at people expecting them to recognize you as superior. How do I change that? By being just Leo. Not the CEO of Warren Holdings, not the heir to an empire, just a man trying to survive another day. She took his hand and led him out of the occupation. Let's go, your education begins now. What Leo didn't know was that Dawn had carefully planned every moment of the next 2 days, not to humiliate him or punish him, but to show him a world where money wasn't the answer to everything, where people found ways to be happy, generous and dignified even without resources, a world where she had learned to be complete, and perhaps, just perhaps, where he could learn to be human. Leo's first lesson happened at lunch. Dawn took him to a popular restaurant in Little Italy, where a meal cost $8 and came with rice, beans, farofa and salad. He sat on the plastic bench, observing the construction workers, street vendors and students who shared the same space without ceremony. Eat, said Dawn, pushing the plate toward him. Leo looked at the simple food without sophisticated seasonings or artistic presentation. It was just real food, made to nourish, not to impress. The first bite surprised him. It tasted of forgotten childhood, of memories of when he visited the kitchen of his house's employees and stole pieces of buttered bread. It's good, he admitted, genuinely surprised. Mrs. Carmen has been cooking here for 20 years. She's fed 3 generations of workers in this region. Dawn ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were precious. She knows the story of each customer, remembers their children's birthdays, lends money when someone is going through hardship. Leo observed the robust woman behind the counter, laughing with a customer, adjusting the salt in the pan with the experience of someone who did it out of love, not just obligation. She seems happy. She is happy. She has purpose, community, people who depend on her and whom she loves. Dawn took a sip of fresh orange juice. Not all wealth is measured in money, Leo. After lunch, she took him to see downtown from a completely different perspective. Not the corporate buildings or shopping centers he frequented, but the real pulse of the metropolis. They visited Chelsea Market, where Dawn knew several merchants by name, bought fruits from a street vendor who offered her a discount. Because you're good people, girl, and sat in Union Square to observe people. See that man there? Dawn discreetly pointed to a gentleman who was feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs. Mr. Jenkins, retired, lives alone in a room and a half in Chinatown. He's been coming here every day for 5 years since his wife died. Says the pigeons are his family now. Leo observed the man, noticing the loneliness disguised as routine, the almost paternal care with which he fed the birds. How do you know all this? Because I talk to him, because I listen. Dawn turned to face him. When was the last time you really talked to someone? not negotiated, not commanded, not instructed, just talked without an agenda, without an objective beyond getting to know another person. Leo tried to remember and realized with discomfort that he couldn't find an answer. All his interactions were transactional, even the personal ones. When night came, Dawn took him back to the occupation. "Tonight you sleep here," she announced, pointing to a thin mattress on the floor, next to the place where she usually slept. "Here with all these people?" Leo looked around, seeing families preparing for the night, children being put to sleep between improvised blankets. "What's the problem? They're people, Leo, like you." He lay down on the uncomfortable mattress, feeling every irregularity of the concrete floor through the thin foam. Dawn settled beside him, so close that he could feel the heat of her body, hear her breathing calming down. Around them, the occupation gradually quieted down, but never completely. There was always someone. Coughing, a baby crying, voices whispering intimate conversations. "How do you manage to sleep like this?" whispered Leo. "With time you get used to it, and then you realize you're not really alone." Dawn turned to him in the darkness. "Have you ever felt truly alone, Leo? Not alone because you chose to be alone, but alone because nobody really knows you?" The question hit him like a punch. In his silent penthouse, with all his technology and luxury, he felt more isolated than here, surrounded by strangers in an abandoned building. "Every day," he admitted, in an almost inaudible voice. "Here, even being invisible to the rest of the world, I'm part of something. These people know me, worry about me, share the little they have." Dawn extended her hand in the dark, finding his. "Can you say the same about anyone in your life?" Leo intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling the rough texture of her hands marked by work and survival. "No." They stayed silent for a long time. Leo was beginning to understand that Dawn wasn't just showing him where she lived, but why she had chosen to remain there. It wasn't resignation or lack of options. It was the discovery of something authentic in a world that he had spent his entire life pretending was real. "Dawn," he whispered in the dark. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me see you. Really." She squeezed his hand gently. "The day isn't over yet. Tomorrow the lesson gets harder." "How can it get harder?" Dawn turned completely to him, and even in the darkness, Leo could feel the intensity of her gaze. "Tomorrow you'll understand what it is to be afraid. Real fear, not the fear of losing money or status, fear of not surviving." A shiver ran down Leo's spine, but it wasn't just fear. It was anticipation. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't know what to expect from the next day, and that was simultaneously terrifying and exciting. "Can I ask you a question?" he whispered. "You can? Why are you doing this for me? Why are you teaching me, showing me your life?" Dawn was silent for so long that Leo thought she had fallen asleep. When she finally answered, her voice was laden with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "Because you're the first person who asked, not who I could be or who I should be, but who I am, where I am, how I am." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And because despite all our history, despite everything that separates us, when I look at you, I see someone who is as lost as I once was." Leo felt something move deeply in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. Dawn. Sleep, Leo. Tomorrow. You'll need energy. But Leo couldn't sleep for hours. He lay there listening to the sounds of the occupation, smelling the odor of dampness and human sweat, aware of Dawn's warm body beside him, thinking about how 48 hours could change an entire life. And for the first time since childhood, he didn't know if he was afraid or in love with the uncertainty that awaited him. The second day began before dawn. Dawn gently shook Leo's shoulder, who had finally managed to fall asleep for a few hours. His body ached in places he didn't know existed, and the reality of where he was hit him like a bucket of cold water. "Let's go," Dawn whispered. "Today, you're going to work." Working for Dawn meant helping organize an improvised swap meet under the Brooklyn Bridge. People arrived with objects they no longer needed, clothes, household items, books, toys, and exchanged them for things they needed. No money was involved, just the human economy of necessity and generosity. Leo found himself carrying heavy boxes, organizing products on improvised benches, helping an elderly lady find a coat of the right size. His hands, accustomed only to the soft touch of office papers and keyboards, soon became dirty and rough. His back, which had never carried anything heavier than an executive briefcase, began to protest. "Tired?" asked Dawn, noticing how he stretched to relieve the pain in his back. "A little," Leo admitted, reluctant to show weakness. "It's just the beginning. We still have 7 hours ahead of us." During the day, Leo observed Dawn interact with dozens of people. She knew their stories, their needs, their fears. A young woman with a baby in her arms needed diapers and managed to exchange them for a dress that no longer fit. An unemployed man found tools in exchange for books he had collected, when he still had a home. Each transaction was more than commercial. It was human, full of conversations, smiles, shared concerns. "How do you know all these people?" asked Leo during a break, while they shared a mortadella sandwich that someone had offered. 7 years. On the streets teaches a lot about community, Dawn replied. When you have nothing, people become everything. Each face has a story. Each story matters. And your story? You never talk about how it was before. Dawn was quiet for a moment, observing the movement around the fair. Before I was different, I had anger, thirst for revenge. I spent my days planning how to destroy your family, how to make you pay for what you did to my mother. Leo felt his stomach contract. What changed? I met Mrs. Thompson. Dawn pointed to a black woman of about 60 who was helping a young mother choose clothes for her children. She found me one dawn when I was 16 and had more desire to die than to live. I was trying to cut myself with a piece of glass when she appeared. My God, Dawn. She didn't try to stop me, didn't preach a sermon, just sat down beside me and said, "If you're going to die anyway, at least tell me your story first. That way, someone will remember you." Dawn smiled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. I spent the whole night talking, crying, screaming, and when the sun rose, she asked, "And now? Do you still want to die, or do you want to try to truly live?" Leo felt tears burn his eyes. "And you chose to live." I chose to try. Mrs. Thompson showed me that revenge is a prison we build for ourselves. That hatred doesn't bring back the dead or heal wounds. She taught me that the only way to honor my mother was by building something better than the pain they killed her with. At that moment, Leo understood something fundamental about Dawn. She hadn't just survived the tragedy. She had transformed. Through it, she had consciously chosen to be greater than the circumstances that tried to destroy her. The afternoon brought a situation that tested all of Leo's limits. A group of teenagers began causing problems at the fair, intimidating the most vulnerable participants, stealing small objects. Dawn approached them with a calmness that contrasted with the palpable tension in the air. "Hey, guys," she said with a firm but not aggressive voice, "you're scaring the children." The leader of the group, a boy of no more than 17 with scars on his face, laughed with disdain. "And what are you going to do about it, princess?" Leo felt the instinct to protect Dawn rise like a wave. He took a step forward, but she stopped him with a subtle gesture of her hand. "I'm going to offer something better than what you're looking for here," Dawn replied, maintaining eye contact with the leader. "Real food, a place to shower, and maybe even work for those who want it." "Work?" The boy spat on the ground. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's opportunity. But if you prefer to continue being just some punks scaring defenseless people—" Dawn shrugged as if it made no difference to her. Leo watched, fascinated, as Dawn slowly diffused the situation, not with force or threats, but with something much more powerful, dignity and genuine respect. She spoke to each of the boys as if they were people who mattered, not just problems to be solved. When they finally walked away, some with food that Dawn had gotten for them, others with information about shelters and social programs, Leo looked at her with an admiration that bordered on reverence. "How did you do that?" "They're not bad, Leo. They're lost, angry, without hope, just like I was." Dawn collected the objects that had been knocked down during the confusion. The only difference between us and them is that someone extended a hand to me at the right moment. And if it hadn't worked, if they had reacted with violence... Dawn looked him directly in the eyes, and there was something almost fierce in her expression. Then I would have dealt with that too, but you can't live in fear of what might happen, otherwise you stop living completely. When the fair ended and they began to collect things, Leo realized his hands were trembling slightly, not from fatigue or cold, but from a strange excitement. There was something addictive about that life, in the unpredictability, in the constant need to adapt and improvise. "Dawn," he said while folding a tarp, "can I ask you a question that you might not want to answer?" "You can try." Leo hesitated, but curiosity was stronger than prudence. Why are you still a virgin?" Dawn finished the question for him, showing no embarrassment. "Is that what you want to know?" "Yes." Dawn stopped what she was doing and turned to face him completely. "Because I never found someone who saw me as more than a body to use or a project to fix. Because sex without real connection is just another kind of loneliness." "And now?" The question came out before Leo could censor it. Dawn came close to him, so close that Leo could see the small scars on her lips, the tiredness in her eyes, the strength in every line of her face. "Now it's more complicated." "Why?" "Because you're no longer just the son of the man who destroyed my family. No longer just a privileged rich person trying to buy your redemption." She lightly touched his face, and Leo felt as if he were on fire. "Now you're Leo, just Leo. And that changes everything." The second night was different. Dawn took Leo to a place she had never shown anyone, the abandoned terrace of a building downtown, accessible only by a rusty fire escape. From above, New York stretched before them like a sea of blinking lights, each illuminated window representing a life, a story, a dream. "This is my secret place," said Dawn, sitting on the edge of the terrace with her legs dangling in the air. "I come here when I need to remember that the world is bigger than my problems." Leo sat beside her, still afraid of the height, but more afraid of disappointing Dawn if he showed it. "It's dangerous." "Everything worth it is dangerous." Dawn looked at him sideways. "Your whole life was built to avoid risks, Leo. And see where that's led you, alone in an ivory tower, surrounded by everything but possessing nothing that really matters. And your life, full of risks, has made you happier." Dawn was quiet, for a long moment, observing the lights of the city. "It's made me more alive. There's a difference." They remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of the metropolis that extended infinitely around them. Leo felt as if he were seeing New York for the first time, not as a territory to be conquered or a market to be dominated, but as a living organism, breathing, pulsing with millions of intertwined stories. "Dawn," he finally said, turning to face her, "I need to tell you something." "I know what you're going to say." She didn't take her eyes off the urban landscape. "And you don't need to say it." "Yes, I do." Leo took a deep breath, feeling as if he were about to jump off the building. "I've fallen in love with you." Dawn closed her eyes as if the words were physically painful. "Leo, let me finish." He turned completely to her, taking her hands. "I didn't fall in love with the idea of saving you or possessing you. I fell in love with the woman who confronts violent teenagers without blinking, who knows the story of every person on the streets who found a way to be happy even after losing everything. You don't understand what you're saying." Dawn finally looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "We can't be together, Leo. Not really." "Why not?" "Because you'll go back to your real life tomorrow. You'll wear your expensive suits, you'll drive your imported cars, you'll dine in restaurants where a meal costs more than most people here make in a week. And if I don't go back?" Dawn laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You will go back, and you should go back. Your company needs you, your employees depend on you, you have responsibilities that you can't simply abandon." "But what about us?" "There is no us, Leo. There's you, there's me, there are two worlds that touched for a magical moment, but that will never really unite." Leo felt desperation rise up his throat. After 48 hours discovering who he really was, the idea of returning to his previous life seemed impossible. What if I changed my life? What if I used my money to make a real difference to help people like you? To help people like me? Dawn stood up abruptly, and there was anger in her eyes now. You still don't understand, do you? I don't need to be helped. I'm not a charity project or a means for you to alleviate your bourgeois guilt. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Dawn began to pace back and forth on the narrow terrace. You spent 2 days in my world and now you think you can fix it with your money? You think you can take me to your life of luxury and that will solve everything? Leo stood up too, feeling the conversation slip from his hands like sand. I just want to be with you. I don't care how. Yes, you do care, because you'll never be able to see me as an equal while I'm the poor thing you saved from the streets. Dawn stopped pacing and looked at him directly. And I'll never be able to truly love you if I'm being supported by your money. Then tell me what to do. The plea came out desperate, almost shouted in the silent night. Tell me how to make this work. Dawn approached him, and for the first time, Leo saw real vulnerability in her eyes. It can't work, Leo. Some stories are beautiful exactly because they're impossible. She came closer, so close that Leo could feel her warm breath on his face. But that doesn't mean we can't have tonight. Before Leo could respond, Dawn kissed him. It wasn't a hesitant or explorative kiss, but something hungry, desperate, full of all the passion they had repressed for days. Leo pulled her closer, feeling as if he were drowning and being saved at the same time. When they separated, both were breathless. Dawn. One night, she whispered against his lips. Give me one night where we can pretend we're just a man and a woman who met at the right time. Leo kissed her again, this time more softly, savoring every second. And after? After you go back to your life, and I go back to mine. And we try to remember this as something beautiful, not as something that destroyed us. They descended, from the terrace in silence, hands intertwined, both knowing they were about to cross a line that would change everything forever. Dawn led him to a small room that she had occasionally rented when she needed privacy. Simple, clean, with just a bed, a chair, and a window that overlooked a narrow alley. Are you sure? Asked Leo, even knowing that if she said no, he would die a little inside. Dawn began to take off her blouse slowly, maintaining eye contact with him. I waited 23 years for the right man. Not the perfect man, not the rich or powerful. Man, for the man who would really see me. Leo felt tears burn his eyes. Dawn. You see me, Leo. Maybe that's why it's so impossible. When they gave themselves to each other that night, it wasn't just sex. It was a fusion of souls, a desperate attempt to become one person, to find a way to never have to separate. Leo discovered that making love with Dawn was like discovering a language he didn't know he spoke, a music he had been listening to his entire life without recognizing the melody. Afterward, as she slept nestled in his arms, Leo stayed awake, observing her relaxed face, memorizing every detail, knowing that when the sun rose, that perfect moment would come to an end. And for the first time in his life, he wished that the night would last forever. Leo woke up alone. The bed still held the warmth of Dawn's body, but she had disappeared like a mirage that only exists in the penumbra between dream and reality. On the pillow, he found a handwritten letter on ordinary paper with the careful handwriting he had seen so many times in her red diary. Leo, when you read this, I will already be gone. It's not cowardice, it's protection. For me and for you. Last night was perfect because it was complete. It was everything it could be, without impossible promises or expectations that could never be fulfilled. Thank you for showing me that love can exist, even when a happy ending isn't possible. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. Be happy, Leo. And when you remember me, smile. Dawn. Leo's hands trembled as he finished reading. He dressed quickly and ran to the streets, looking for her in all the places they had been together. The occupation, the fair, Mrs. Carmen's restaurant, the square where they had talked. Nobody had seen her. It was as if Dawn had simply evaporated from reality. For 3 weeks, Leo lived in a state of functional despair. He returned to work, presided over meetings, made decisions that moved millions, but was completely absent. His employees noticed. The change, the CEO who had always been calculating and cold, now seemed laden with a melancholy that made him almost human. It was Carlos, his assistant, who finally confronted him. "Mr. Warren, I need to know if you're going to approve the Foundation's new projects. The homeless shelters have been delayed for months." Leo raised his eyes from the papers he wasn't reading. "What shelters?" "The ones you approved before." "Well, before disappearing for 2 days." Carlos hesitated. "The Dawn Mary project, remember?" The name hit Leo like lightning. Dawn Mary. He had completely forgotten about the project he had created in a pathetic attempt to impress her. Now the name sounded like a prophecy. "Carlos, I want you to accelerate this project. I want it to be absolute priority." "Yes, sir." "Is there any other specification?" Leo was quiet for a long moment, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "Yes. I want each shelter to have a library. I want literacy programs, art workshops, spaces for people to tell their stories, and I want it to be more than a place to sleep. I want it to be a place where people can rebuild their lives while maintaining their dignity." Carlos took notes quickly. "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes, I want you to find a woman named Thompson. She should be about 60 years old, works with the homeless population downtown. Offer her the general coordination of the project." 2. Months later, the first Dawn Mary Center was inaugurated in downtown New York. Leo arrived early for the ceremony, secretly hoping that Dawn would appear. She didn't, but Mrs. Thompson was there, elegant in her new blue dress, supervising every detail with the experienced eye of someone who had dedicated her life to caring for invisible people. "You're Leo," she said, approaching him with a smile that mixed gratitude and curiosity. "You know me? Dawn talked about you a lot." Mrs. Thompson studied him with eyes that had seen much of human nature. She said you were different than she expected. Leo's heart accelerated. "Is she okay?" "Where is she?" "She's okay, and she's far away." Mrs. Thompson gently touched his arm. "Sometimes the truest love is the one that liberates, not the one that confines. I didn't want to confine her. I just wanted to be with her. I know, my son, but Dawn needed to prove to herself that she could rebuild her life alone, that she didn't need anyone to be complete." Leo looked around the center that bore her name. Children ran through the courtyard. Adults participated in workshops. People who had lost everything found a new chance to start over. "And did she succeed?" Mrs. Thompson smiled. "She's succeeding. She went back to school, you know. Finished high school, started college in social work. She wants to work with people like her, but in an official capacity now." "Where?" "That I can't tell you, I promised her." Leo nodded, understanding. "But can you give her a message?" "I can. Tell her I understood. Tell her that. Tell her she taught me to truly live, and that every day I wake up trying to be the man she saw in me during those 2 days." Mrs. Thompson observed him carefully. "And are you succeeding?" Leo looked again at the center, at the people who had found a second chance, at the project that had been born from the impossible love, for a woman who had completely transformed him. "I'm trying." 6 months later, Warren Holdings had become one of the country's most innovative companies in social responsibility. Leo had created microcredit programs, professional training centers, and a permanent fund to combat urban poverty. His photo appeared on the cover of business magazines, with headlines about the CEO who humanized capitalism. But Leo knew the truth. He hadn't humanized anything. He had simply learned to be human. On a December night, exactly 1 year after, meeting Dawn, Leo was working late in his office when he received a simple envelope with no return address. Inside, there was only a photo. Dawn graduated in social work, smiling next to Mrs. Thompson, holding a diploma. On the back, a phrase, written in the handwriting he knew by heart, Thank you for helping me find my way back to myself." Leo kept the photo in his wallet, next to his heart. It wasn't the happy ending he had dreamed of, but it was perfect just as it was. Dawn had become who she was always destined to be, and he had become who she had seen in him from the first moment. Some loves aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to transform us forever. And when Leo looked out the window of his office, seeing the city he had learned to love through Dawn's eyes, he knew he had been loved by the rarest kind of love that exists.